She had just buckled her children into the car, preparing for another mundane school run. Then, without warning, a man forced his way into the passenger seat, a jerry can in hand. Fuel spilled, fire exploded, and the children were trapped. What happened next will leave you speechless. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. It was just another ordinary morning in Camp Hill, Brisbane, February 19, 2020. The sun was rising over the quiet suburban streets. Parents were getting their kids ready for school. The smell of breakfast filled the air. But for one family, everything was about to turn into a living nightmare. A mother, her heart already heavy with fear, buckled her 3 beautiful children into their car seats. Elia, 6 years old, Leanna, 4, and little Trey, just 3 years old. She checked the buckles twice the way mothers do, making sure everyone was safe and secure. But before she could even turn the key in the ignition, before she could pull out of that driveway, a man jumped into the vehicle. He was clutching a petrol can, and before Hannah Clarke could scream, before she could fight back, flames erupted inside that car. The worst part? Her 3 innocent children were still strapped in their seats. This isn't just another true crime story. This is a tragedy that shook an entire nation to its core and exposed failures in a system that was supposed to protect the vulnerable. If you've never heard Hannah's story before, I need you to stay with me, because what happened that morning and the events that led up to it reveal something we all need to understand about domestic violence. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll never look at the warning signs the same way again. But let me take you back to the beginning, back to when Hannah Clarke was full of life, hope, and dreams for the future. Hannah Jade Marshall was born in 1988 in Brisbane, Queensland, a vibrant city on Australia's eastern coast. From the moment she could walk, Hannah was bursting with energy. She wasn't the kind of child who could sit still for long. She needed to move, to jump, to fly through the air. And that's exactly what she did. By her teenage years, Hannah had become a state-level trampolining champion, soaring through competitions with grace and determination that left audiences in awe. But it wasn't just about winning for Hannah. She fell in love with the sport itself, the feeling of weightlessness, the discipline it required, the joy it brought. And she wanted to share that joy with others. So, Hannah dedicated herself to coaching gymnastics, particularly working with children who needed that same outlet for their energy and passion. Parents would drop their kids off at the gym and watch as Hannah transformed nervous beginners into confident athletes. She had this incredible gift, this warmth that made every child feel seen, valued, and capable of achieving their dreams. Friends and family described her as someone who lit up every room she entered. She was fiercely loyal, deeply caring, and absolutely devoted to the people she loved. But beneath that bright exterior, Hannah was also someone who believed in second chances. She believed in seeing the good in people, even when others might have walked away. And that beautiful quality, that willingness to trust and love deeply, would eventually become both her greatest strength and her most vulnerable point. Because in 2008, when Hannah was just 20 years old, she met someone who would change the entire trajectory of her life. His name was Rowan Charles Baxter, and at first glance, he seemed like everything she could have hoped for. But sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones who know exactly how to appear safe. Let me tell you about Rowan Baxter, because understanding who he was is crucial to understanding how this tragedy unfolded. Rowan was born on February 5, 1977, in Tauranga, New Zealand, a coastal city known for its beaches and laid-back atmosphere. But Rowan's childhood was anything but peaceful. His father was imprisoned when Rowan was young, a fact that would leave deep psychological scars on the boy. Growing up without a stable father figure, Rowan developed what psychologists call attachment issues, an inability to form healthy, trusting relationships. He also showed early signs of a volatile temper. Friends from his school days remember him as someone who could be charming one moment and explosively angry the next. There was no middle ground with Rowan. But he was also athletic, strong, competitive, and driven to prove himself in physical pursuits. He played rugby. He lifted weights. He presented himself as the epitome of masculine strength. On the surface, he looked like someone who had it all together. And that's exactly what made him so dangerous. Because beneath that confident exterior was a man who desperately needed to control everything and everyone around him. He couldn't handle criticism, he couldn't accept failure, and most importantly, he couldn't stand the idea of anyone leaving him. These weren't just personality quirks, these were red flags that would eventually explode into violence. But when Hannah met Rowan at the Police Citizens Youth Club in 2008, she didn't see any of that. She saw a successful, athletic man who seemed interested in fitness and community just like her. He was 31 years old. She was 20. That 11-year age gap should have raised some eyebrows, but at the time, it just seemed like Rowan was mature and established in his life. He had experience, he had confidence, he seemed to have direction, and he was absolutely fixated on Hannah from the moment they met. At first, that attention felt flattering. He would text her constantly. He wanted to spend every free moment with her. He showed up at her gym to watch her coach. It felt like the kind of intense romance you see in movies, someone who was completely captivated by her. But looking back now, those weren't signs of deep love. They were signs of obsession. Still, Hannah was young and in love, and when Rowan proposed, she said yes. They got married in 2012, surrounded by friends and family who hoped this would be Hannah's happily ever after. And for a brief moment, it seemed like it might be. They started a business together, a gym called Integer 8 Fitness, in the Brisbane suburb of Kapalaba. They combined their shared passion for athletics and coaching, building something they hoped would serve the community and provide for their growing family. Because by this point, Hannah was pregnant with their first child. Aaliyah was born, and Hannah threw herself into motherhood with the same dedication she brought to everything else in her life. She was a natural patient, loving, and completely devoted to her daughter. Then came Liana. And finally, Trey. 3 beautiful children who brought light and laughter into their home. From the outside, the Baxters looked like the perfect family, successful business owners, 3 gorgeous kids, athletic and involved in their community. But, behind closed doors, something dark was growing. And it started with something so subtle that Hannah almost didn't notice it at first. Rowan started insisting they share a Facebook account. Now, I know what you're thinking, that might not sound like a big deal. Lots of couples share social media accounts, right? But this wasn't about togetherness, this was about control. Rowan wanted to see every message Hannah sent and received. He wanted to know who she was talking to, what she was saying, and when she was saying it. He told her it was because they were married, that married couples shouldn't have secrets. But really, he was starting to build a cage around her. Then came the isolation from friends. Hannah's close friends, the ones she'd known for years, started noticing something strange. Hannah was always too busy to meet up anymore. She stopped responding to messages. She pulled away from the relationships that had sustained her for so long. But it wasn't Hannah's choice. Rowan had convinced her that her friends were a bad influence, that they didn't understand their marriage, that spending time with them was disrespectful to him. And slowly, so slowly that Hannah barely realized it was happening, her world began to shrink. Her family noticed it too. Hannah's parents, Sue and Lloyd Clarke, watched as their vibrant, outgoing daughter became quieter, more withdrawn, more anxious. But every time they asked if everything was okay, Hannah would smile and say yes, because that's what abuse victims do. They protect their abusers. They make excuses. They minimize. They convince themselves that if they just try harder, if they just love more, things will get better. But things never got better with Rowan, they only got worse. The psychological abuse escalated into something even more sinister. Rowan installed tracking software on Hannah's phone without her knowledge. He could see everywhere she went, every call she made, every text she sent. She had no privacy, no freedom, no space to breathe. And when she discovered what he'd done and confronted him about it, his rage was terrifying. He didn't apologize, he justified it. He told her that if she had nothing to hide, she shouldn't care that he was monitoring her. He twisted the situation to make her feel like she was the one in the wrong for being upset about this massive violation of trust. This is something called gaslighting, a form of psychological manipulation where the abuser makes the victim question their own reality and judgment. and Rowan was a master at it. But the psychological abuse wasn't enough for him anymore. By 2016, after 4 years of marriage, Rowan's control had escalated to physical violence. The first time he strangled her, Hannah was absolutely terrified. Strangulation is one of the most dangerous forms of domestic violence because it's not just about causing pain. It's about asserting complete dominance, showing the victim that the abuser has the power to take their life. Research shows that when an abuser strangles their partner, the victim's risk of being killed by that abuser increases by 700%. 700%. But Hannah didn't know those statistics. Then all she knew was the feeling of his hands around her throat, cutting off her air, making her wonder if she was about to die. And when he finally let go, when she gasped for breath and collapsed on the floor, he didn't show remorse. He blamed her. He said she had provoked him, that she had pushed him to that point, that if she would just stop making him angry, he wouldn't have to do these things. This is the cycle of abuse, the explosion of violence, followed by the apology or justification, followed by a period of calm that makes the victim hope things will change. But they never do. The cycle just repeats, with the violence getting worse each time. Hannah tried to protect her children from seeing these incidents. She would wait until they were asleep or distracted before confronting Rowan about his behavior. But children know, even when they don't witness the violence directly, they feel the tension in the house. They hear the raised voices. They see their mother's tears. And that was breaking Hannah's heart more than anything Rowan did to her. She could endure the abuse for herself, but watching her children grow up in this environment was unbearable. By 2019, their gym business was failing. The combination of Rowan's erratic behavior and the financial pressures of running a small business had taken their toll. They were losing money, losing members, losing the dream they had built together. And Rowan was losing his grip on reality. He became convinced that everyone was against him, that the failures of the business were everyone else's fault, never his own. His paranoia grew, his violence increased, and Hannah knew deep in her soul that she had to get out. But leaving an abusive partner is the most dangerous time for a victim. Statistics show that 75% of domestic violence murders happen after the victim has left or attempted to leave the relationship. Because, for the abuser, losing control is the ultimate threat. And Rowan Baxter was about to prove just how dangerous he could be. In December of 2019, Hannah finally made her move. She took the children and left, moving in with her parents, Sue and Lloyd, who welcomed them with open arms and vowed to protect them. Hannah immediately sought help from the legal system, filing for a domestic violence order, which is similar to a restraining order. But getting that piece of paper didn't make her safe. Because the system, as well-intentioned as it might be, wasn't equipped to handle someone like Rowan Baxter. On January 10, 2020, just weeks before the tragedy, Rowan committed an act that should have resulted in his immediate arrest and imprisonment. He abducted their 4-year-old daughter, Liana. Let me say that again. He kidnapped his own child in violation of custody arrangements. Hannah was frantic. She called the police immediately, reporting that Rowan had taken Liana without permission and she didn't know where they were. The police eventually located them, and Liana was returned safely. But what happened to Rowan? Nothing. Despite breaching the domestic violence order, despite terrifying Hannah and traumatizing their daughter, Rowan faced no serious consequences. The system failed to recognize this for what it was, an escalation, a clear sign that Rowan was willing to cross boundaries, break laws, and cause harm to get what he wanted. Instead of being arrested, Rowan was allowed to maintain partial custody of the children. Shared custody arrangements were put in place, meaning Hannah had to regularly hand her children over to a man she knew was dangerous. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the terror of watching your children get into a car with someone you know has violent tendencies, and being powerless to stop it because the court says he has rights as a father? This is the reality for so many domestic violence victims. The system often prioritizes the rights of parents over the safety of children and the protecting parent. And in Hannah's case, this failure would have the most devastating consequences imaginable. But there were other failures too, failures that, in hindsight, seem almost incomprehensible. Just days before the tragedy, Rowan Baxter walked into a hardware store and purchased 2 items. petrol, and zip ties. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. A man who is already under a domestic violence order, who has recently abducted his own child, walks into a store and buys petrol and zip ties. What possible innocent explanation could there be for that combination of items? But nobody flagged it, nobody questioned it, nobody intervened. Because the systems we have in place to protect people aren't designed to recognize these patterns, these red flags that, when put together, paint a clear picture of premeditated violence. This is what experts call coercive control, a pattern of behavior that's designed to intimidate, isolate, and dominate another person. It's not just about individual acts of violence, it's about creating an environment where the victim lives in constant fear and has no autonomy over their own life. And at the time of Hannah's case, coercive control wasn't even a recognized crime in most of Australia. The law focused on individual incidents, a punch, a threat, a broken restraining order, but it didn't account for the cumulative effect of years of psychological torture and manipulation. Hannah tried to explain this to authorities, tried to make them understand that Rowan wasn't just angry or difficult. He was dangerous. He was escalating. He was planning something. But without concrete evidence of an imminent threat, there was little they could do. So Hannah did everything she could to protect herself and her children within the limitations of the system. She kept detailed records of Rowan's behavior. She documented every violation of the domestic violence order. She stayed with her parents where she felt safer. And she tried to maintain some sense of normalcy for her kids, getting them ready for school each morning, taking them to activities, tucking them into bed at night. But on the morning of February 19th, 2020, that fragile sense of security shattered completely. Hannah was at her parents' home in Camp Hill, a quiet Brisbane suburb. It was around 8:30 in the morning time to take the kids to school. She walked out to her white Kia SUV, parked in the driveway, with Aaliyah, Lyanna, and Trey following behind her. The children were excited about the day ahead, chattering and laughing the way kids do, completely innocent to the danger that was about to unfold. Hannah buckled 6-year-old Aaliyah into her seat. Then, 4-year-old Lyanna. And finally, 3-year-old Trey in his car seat. She checked each buckle twice, a mother's instinct to make sure her babies were safe and secure. But as she was about to get into the driver's seat, something caught her eye. A figure moving quickly toward the car. It was Rowan. He had been waiting, watching, planning this exact moment. Before Hannah could react, before she could lock the doors or scream for help, Rowan yanked open the car door and jumped into the front passenger seat. Hannah's heart must have been racing, adrenaline flooding her system as she realized this was it. This was the moment she had been dreading. But she had to stay calm, had to protect her children who were just inches away in the back seat. Rowan was holding something in his hands, a petrol can. And before Hannah could process what was happening, before she could unbuckle her children and run, Rowan began dousing the interior of the car with fuel. The smell was overwhelming, sharp and chemical, filling the enclosed space in seconds. Hannah screamed. She begged. She pleaded with him to think about the children. But Rowan wasn't thinking about the children. He was thinking about control, about power, about the fact that if he couldn't have Hannah, nobody would. And then, in an act of pure evil, he ignited the petrol. Flames erupted instantly, engulfing the interior of the vehicle in a fireball. Hannah's screams pierced the morning air, a sound that neighbors would later say haunted them for months afterward. She could feel her skin burning. She could hear her children crying out for her. And in that moment of absolute horror, this incredible mother did something that defies human comprehension. With flames consuming her body, with pain beyond imagination, Hannah Clarke forced herself to think clearly. She couldn't save herself, but maybe, just maybe, she could save her babies. Hannah managed to get her door open and stumbled out of the burning vehicle. Her clothes were on fire. Her skin was melting, but she wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about 3 car seats in the back, 3 children who couldn't unbuckle themselves, 3 innocent lives that depended entirely on her. Neighbors heard the commotion and came running. What they saw was a scene from a nightmare, a woman on fire, screaming for help, trying desperately to get back to the car. Several brave neighbors rushed forward with blankets and water, trying to extinguish the flames on Hannah's body. But even as they helped her, even as she collapsed from the pain and trauma, she was crying out for her children. "My babies. Please, get my babies." But it was too late. The flames had already consumed the interior of the car, and Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey were still buckled in their seats. Some neighbors tried to approach the vehicle, but the heat was too intense, the flames too fierce. They couldn't get close enough without risking their own lives. And inside that car, 3 beautiful children were dying. All because their father, the man who was supposed to protect them, had decided that if he couldn't control Hannah, he would rather kill them all. But here's something that makes this even more chilling. Rowan Baxter didn't try to escape. He didn't run away after lighting the fire. He stayed in that car, and he killed himself. He stabbed himself in the chest with a knife he had brought with him, ending his own life even as he destroyed his family. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of lost control. This was premeditated murder-suicide, a final act of dominance and destruction. Emergency services arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do. 3 children were pronounced dead at the scene, still strapped in their car seats, exactly where their mother had secured them to keep them safe. And Hannah, brave, beautiful Hannah, was rushed to Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital with burns to 75% of her body. She was in unimaginable pain. But you know what her first words to paramedics were? "He poured petrol on me. My children. He's taken them from me." Even in her darkest moment, even as her own life was slipping away, Hannah was thinking about her babies. She survived for several hours at the hospital, long enough for her parents Sue and Lloyd to reach her bedside, long enough to tell police what Rowan had done, long enough to make sure the truth would be known. And then, surrounded by the family who loved her, Hannah Clarke took her last breath. She died later that day from the catastrophic injuries inflicted by the man she had once trusted, the man she had married, the man who had promised to love and protect her. 4 lives lost in a single morning, 4 futures stolen, all because of one man's need for control. The news of the tragedy spread across Australia like wildfire. Within hours, it was the top story on every news channel. Social media exploded with grief, outrage, and demands for answers. How could this have happened? How did the system fail so catastrophically? What warning signs were missed? Vigils were organized across Brisbane and then across Australia as thousands of people came together to mourn Hannah and her children. People who had never met the Clarke family stood outside their home, laying flowers and teddy bears and candles. They held signs that read, "Justice for Hannah and protect our women." Because this wasn't just a private tragedy, this was a public failure. A failure of the legal system, a failure of law enforcement, a failure of society to recognize and respond to domestic violence. Hannah's parents, Sue and Lloyd Clarke, were absolutely shattered. In one horrific morning, they had lost their daughter and 3 grandchildren. But even in their grief, even as they struggled to process the unimaginable, they began speaking out. They appeared on news programs and gave interviews, asking one question over and over again. Why didn't the system protect them? They talked about how Hannah had done everything right, how she had left the relationship, sought legal protection, documented the abuse, reported violations, but none of it had been enough. Because the system wasn't designed to recognize coercive control, it wasn't equipped to see the pattern of escalating behavior that experts could see so clearly in hindsight. It prioritized parental rights over safety concerns, and it underestimated the danger that men like Rowan Baxter pose. The public outcry was enormous. People wanted to know why Rowan had been allowed to maintain custody after abducting Liana, why his purchase of petrol and zip ties hadn't raised red flags, why Hannah's pleas for protection hadn't been taken seriously enough. And slowly, painfully, the conversation began to shift. Australia began talking about coercive control as a distinct form of abuse. Experts in domestic violence came forward to explain how psychological manipulation, isolation, and intimidation could be just as deadly as physical violence. They talked about how abusers often escalate when they lose control and how separation is the most dangerous time for victims. They explained that Rowan's behavior before the tragedy, the tracking, the isolation, the abduction, were all clear warning signs of someone capable of lethal violence. But perhaps the most important conversation that emerged was about how we, as a society, talk about and respond to domestic violence. Because in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, there were some truly appalling responses. A police union official made a statement suggesting that maybe we should consider both sides of the story. The backlash was swift and fierce. Thousands of people, including domestic violence advocates, survivors, and supporters, immediately called out this victim-blaming rhetoric. Because there are no both sides when someone murders their children, there is no justification for burning 3 innocent kids to death, and the fact that anyone in a position of authority would suggest otherwise revealed just how deep the problem runs. The official eventually apologized and retracted the statement, but the damage was done. It exposed how normalized domestic violence has become, how quickly people jump to defend abusers or question victims. But the Clarke family refused to let Hannah's story be twisted or minimized. They spoke with incredible grace and strength about who Hannah really was. They shared photos of her with the children smiling, laughing, living the life she loved. They talked about Aaliyah's love of school and her kind heart, about Leanna's infectious giggle and her affection for animals, about little Trey's curiosity and the way he would wrap his tiny arms around people's necks for hugs. They made sure the world knew these weren't just statistics, they were real people with hopes and dreams and futures that were stolen from them. And they began channeling their grief into action. Sue and Lloyd Clarke established Small Steps for Hannah, a foundation dedicated to raising awareness about coercive control and advocating for legal reforms. The foundation's mission is simple but powerful: to prevent other families from experiencing what they experienced, to make sure Hannah's death and the deaths of Aaliyah, Leanna, and Trey lead to meaningful change. And slowly, that change began to happen. In the months and years following the tragedy, several Australian states began reviewing their domestic violence laws. Queensland, where the tragedy occurred, started serious discussions about criminalizing coercive control. The idea was that, by making psychological abuse a criminal offense rather than waiting for physical violence to occur, authorities could intervene earlier. They could remove dangerous individuals before situations escalated to murder. In 2021, Tasmania became the first Australian state to introduce specific laws against coercive control. New South Wales followed in 2022. These laws recognize that domestic violence isn't just about individual acts of physical assault. It's about a pattern of behavior designed to dominate, isolate, and terrorize victims. And by criminalizing that pattern, by giving police and courts the tools to recognize and respond to it, lawmakers hoped to save lives. But legal reform is only part of the solution. There also needs to be education helping people recognize the warning signs of abusive relationships in themselves and others. Because the truth is, coercive control often starts subtly. It might begin with a partner who wants to know where you are at all times, someone who insists on having passwords to all your accounts, someone who gradually isolates you from friends and family, often in ways that seem loving at first. "I just want to spend more time with you. Your friends don't understand our relationship. Your family doesn't respect me." These statements might sound like expressions of love and commitment, but they're actually control tactics. Then there's the gaslighting, making you question your own perceptions and memories. That didn't happen the way you remember it. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. Over time, these statements erode your confidence in your own judgment. You start relying on your partner to tell you what's real and what isn't. And that's exactly where they want you. Financial control is another huge red flag. An abuser might insist on controlling all the money, giving you an allowance, or requiring you to ask permission for every purchase. They might prevent you from working or sabotage your career opportunities. Because if you don't have your own money, you can't leave. And of course, there's the escalation to physical violence. It might start with small things: grabbing your arm too hard, pushing you against a wall, throwing objects near you. But it always escalates. And if your partner ever strangles you even, once you are in extreme danger. Remember that statistic. Strangulation increases your risk of being killed by that partner by 700%. That's not something you can minimize or explain away. That's a clear sign you need to get out immediately. But I know what some of you might be thinking. It's not that easy to just leave. And you're absolutely right. Leaving an abusive relationship is incredibly difficult for so many reasons. There's the emotional attachment. You still remember the good times, the person you fell in love with, the promises they made. There's the hope that they'll change, that if you just love them enough or try hard enough, they'll become the person you thought they were. There's the fear of what will happen if you leave, the threats, the stalking, the potential violence. And there's the practical reality. Where will you go? How will you support yourself? What about the children? These are all real and valid concerns. But what Hannah's story teaches us is that staying is far more dangerous than leaving. Yes, the statistics show that leaving is a dangerous time, but staying with someone who exhibits these behaviors is a death sentence waiting to happen. So if you're in an abusive relationship, or if you suspect someone you love is, here's what you need to know. First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, if you feel afraid in your own home, that's not normal, and it's not okay. You're not overreacting. You're not being too sensitive. Your fear is valid. Second, document everything. Keep a journal of incidents, dates, times, what happened, who witnessed it. Take photos of injuries. Save threatening texts or emails. This documentation can be crucial if you need to seek legal protection later. Third, reach out for help, but do it safely. Contact a domestic violence hotline using a phone or computer your partner can't monitor. If you're in Australia, you can call 1-800-RESPECT at any time. In the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1. In the UK, it's 0808-2000247. These services are confidential and staffed by people who understand what you're going through. They can help you create a safety plan, a detailed strategy for leaving safely. This might include things like where you'll go, how you'll get there, what you'll take with you, who you can trust to help. Having a plan can literally save your life. Fourth, build a support network even if your partner has tried to isolate you. Reconnect with friends and family, even if it's been a while. Most people who care about you will be relieved to hear from you and eager to help. And don't be afraid to reach out to professionals, therapists, domestic violence advocates, legal aid services. You don't have to navigate this alone. Fifth, when you're ready to leave, and only you can decide when that time is, prioritize your safety above everything else. Don't tell your partner you're leaving until you're already gone. Don't go back for belongings. Your life is more valuable than any possession. And if you have children, take them with you if it's safe to do so. Once you're out, get legal protection, restraining orders, custody arrangements, whatever is available in your jurisdiction. But also understand that these are just pieces of paper. They might deter some abusers, but they didn't stop Rowan Baxter. So you also need practical safety measures. Change your phone number, block your abuser on all platforms, vary your daily routines, tell your workplace and your children's school about the situation, and keep documenting everything, every violation of the restraining order, every threatening message, every time they show up where they shouldn't be. Because the more evidence you have, the more seriously authorities will take the threat. Now, I want to talk to those of you who aren't in abusive relationships, but who might know someone who is. How can you help? First, believe them. If someone confides in you about abuse, don't question them or ask what they did to provoke it. Just listen. Validate their experience. Let them know it's not their fault. Second, don't pressure them to leave. I know that seems counterintuitive. We want to rescue people we care about. But leaving is a deeply personal decision that involves complex emotions and logistics. Instead of saying just leave, say, I'm here for you whenever you're ready. Third, offer concrete support. Can you provide a place to stay? Help with childcare? Assistance finding resources? Sometimes, the smallest gesture's a safe place to keep important documents, a phone they can use, a friend who will believe them, make all the difference. Fourth, don't give up on them. Abuse victims often go back to their abusers multiple times before leaving for good. It's frustrating to watch, but it's part of the cycle. Keep the door open. Keep offering support. Don't make them feel ashamed for not leaving when you think they should. And finally, educate yourself about domestic violence. The more you understand about coercive control, trauma bonding, and the cycle of abuse, the better equipped you'll be to help. Hannah Clarke's story isn't just a tragedy, it's a lesson. A lesson about the insidious nature of domestic violence, about how it can hide behind closed doors in seemingly normal families, about how the warning signs are there if we know what to look for, about how the systems we've built to protect people aren't always enough, and about how much work we still have to do to prevent these tragedies from happening. Since Hannah's death, there have been other high-profile domestic violence cases in Australia and around the world. Each one sparks renewed outrage and calls for change. But outrage isn't enough. We need sustained action. We need laws that recognize coercive control as the crime it is. We need police and judges trained to understand the dynamics of domestic violence. We need adequate funding for shelters, hotlines, and support services. We need employers to recognize that domestic violence isn't just a personal problem, it affects workplace safety and productivity. We need schools to teach healthy relationship dynamics and consent from an early age. We need to challenge the cultural narratives that minimize or excuse abuse. And we need to keep telling stories like Hannah's, not to sensationalize or exploit tragedy, but to honor victims and prevent future violence. The Foundation, Small Steps For Hannah continues this work today. They've partnered with schools to deliver education programs about healthy relationships and recognizing abuse. They've advocated for legislative changes at the state and federal level. They've supported other families who have lost loved ones to domestic violence. And they've kept Hannah's memory alive, not as a victim, but as a vibrant woman who loved her children fiercely and fought to protect them until her last breath. Every year on February 19th, vigils are held across Australia to remember Hannah, Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey. Thousands of people gather, many wearing purple, the color associated with domestic violence awareness. They light candles, they share stories, they commit to doing better. Because that's what Hannah would have wanted for her tragedy to inspire change, to save other families from experiencing this nightmare, to create a world where children don't have to grow up witnessing violence, where victims are believed and protected, where abusers face real consequences before situations escalate to murder. Sue and Lloyd Clarke have shown incredible strength in the years since losing their daughter and grandchildren. They've spoken at conferences, appeared in documentaries, and met with lawmakers. They've shared their most painful memories in the hope that it might help someone else. In interviews, Sue often talks about the warning signs she wishes she had recognized earlier. The way Rowan isolated Hannah. The tracking. The control. She thought he was just possessive, she didn't realize he was dangerous. And she wants other parents to know. If your child's partner exhibits these behaviors, trust your instincts. Have difficult conversations. Offer support. Help them create an exit plan. Don't wait until it's too late. Lloyd talks about the rage he feels at Rowan, at the system, at the randomness of it all. How do you make peace with the fact that your daughter and grandchildren were murdered? The answer is, you don't. You learn to live with the grief. You channel it into something productive. You fight to make sure their deaths meant something. And that's exactly what the Clarke family has done. The impact of their advocacy has been profound. In Queensland, the government has invested millions in domestic violence prevention and support services. Police officers now receive specialized training in recognizing coercive control. Courts have been directed to take domestic violence allegations more seriously in custody disputes. And perhaps most importantly, the public conversation has changed. People are more aware now of what domestic violence really looks like. They understand it's not just bruises and black eyes. It's isolation, control, manipulation, fear, and they know that anyone can be a victim regardless of education, income, or social status. Because Hannah was a successful business owner and gymnastics coach, she came from a loving, supportive family. She had resources and education, and she still couldn't escape. That's how powerful these abusers are, and how inadequate our systems can be in stopping them. But there is hope. Every time someone recognizes the warning signs and leaves before it's too late, that's a victory. Every time a friend believes a victim and offers support, that's a victory. Every time a court takes domestic violence seriously and prioritizes safety over parental rights, that's a victory. Every time a student learns about healthy relationships and respects boundaries, that's a victory. These small steps, these incremental changes, they add up. And maybe, just maybe, they'll prevent the next tragedy. Hannah Clarke should be alive today. She should be 46 years old, coaching gymnastics and watching her children grow up. Aaliyah should be 11 now, probably excelling in school and discovering her passions. Liana should be 9, that age where everything is an adventure and the world is full of possibilities. And Trey should be 8, no longer a toddler but a young boy with his own personality and dreams. But they're not here. They were stolen from this world by someone who claimed to love them. And that's the ultimate tragedy, that love became twisted into possession and possession into violence. So, as we come to the end of Hannah's story, I want you to remember a few things. First, domestic violence is not a private matter. It's a public health crisis that affects millions of people around the world, and we all have a role to play in addressing it. Second, the warning signs are there. Coercive control, isolation, escalating aggression, obsessive behavior. If you see these signs in your own relationship or someone else's, take them seriously. Third, leaving is the right choice, even when it's hard. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, it's scary. But staying with an abuser is more dangerous. And there are people who will help you, you just have to reach out. Fourth, we need to keep pushing for systemic change. Better laws, better training, better resources. These things save lives. And fifth, every victim deserves to be remembered as a person, not just a statistic. Hannah was a champion trampolinist and dedicated coach, a loving daughter and devoted mother, someone who brought joy to everyone who knew her. Aaliyah was a bright, kind-hearted girl who loved school. Liana was full of laughter and loved animals. Trey was curious and affectionate, a little boy who loved hugs. They were real people with real lives and real futures. And they mattered. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. I know it's been heavy. I know it's been difficult. But these stories need to be told. Because silence protects abusers. And speaking out saves lives. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. In Australia, 1800 Respect 1-800-737-732. In the United States, National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. In the UK, National Domestic Abuse Helpline at 0808 2000 247. These services are confidential, free, and available 24/7. You don't have to face this alone, and if you want to honor Hannah's memory, consider supporting Small Steps for Hannah or a domestic violence organization in your area. Donate if you can, volunteer if you're able, educate yourself and others. Because every small step, every action we take brings us closer to a world where tragedies like this don't happen, where children grow up safe and loved, where victims are believed and protected, where abusers face consequences before situations escalate to murder. That's the world Hannah would have wanted for her children. And that's the world we owe her. So, let's keep her memory alive, not through grief and despair, but through action and change. Let's make sure that Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey didn't die in vain. Let's build a better future one small step at a time. Rest in peace, Hannah Clarke. Rest in peace, Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey. You are loved, you are remembered, and your story will continue to save lives. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story affected you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment, sharing your thoughts or your own experiences. This community is here to support each other. And subscribe to stay informed about stories that matter, stories that can make a difference in your life or the life of someone you love. Together, we can break the cycle of domestic violence. Together, we can protect the vulnerable. Together, we can create change. Thank you. And remember, if you see something, say something. Your voice could save a life.